well. Five here. Five here. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy. Hey, what's up?
And today we're going to talk a little bit more about Pathfinder Second Edition. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, okay, we like to talk about games, and I don't know, I don't know how to even frame this one because we have talked so much about Pathfinder stuff, but we have actually played it. I think is really what it comes down to, right? We've started playing Pathfinder. We are however many sessions, maybe 4 sessions deep into Heretic Heroes at this point, and I guess we're kind of at a position where we can actually talk a little bit about Pathfinder 2. Is Pathfinder 2 sweet? Is Pathfinder 2 lame? Right? We can begin to answer some of these questions, at least, at a basic kind of level. I have about a million thoughts about this, but you were the one who proposed it. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been playing Pathfinder 2E for years, and so I figured this would be more your opportunity to reflect on, and I could offer my color commentary on how things work in the later games. It's been interesting just because, I usually am the guy that knows the second most at the table, unless it's like Mark running, and then Nick is the person who knows the second most, and I'm the third most, just because Nick's got an encyclopedic knowledge of anything that he decides to play. But it feels like I actually know the rules the best at the table, and I'm kind of assisting you at various points.
It is also funny to me because I don't want to bring up anything a little spicy, but it's also funny to me because I feel like I probably am playing in a more sort of improvisational kind of place than it sounds like some of the other games. I get the sense that the game that we're running is maybe exploration crunch would be a way that I could kind of frame it. I feel like there's a lot of roles that are happening, but it's a lot of skill checks. It's not a lot of combat, not a lot of dungeon crawling, compared to the way that you have described your other Pathfinder games to me. Does that seem accurate or not?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the thing where I'm like, I don't particularly enjoy playing adventure paths, right? Which is and the guys who run those games are great, but they are middle-aged or older men who have only so many hours to dedicate to running a D&D game a week, and so they run the game out of the book and do a little bit of stuff on their own, but at the end of the day, they're we're walking along the adventure path, and it's a little bit less flexible in those ways, in the way that all adventure paths are, right? So
yeah, it's funny. I was talking a lot about this. So obviously PAX was last week, which is why we didn't end up recording the podcast for obvious reasons. And one of the things I ended up talking for a long time with friend of the Castarian about was about the nature of kind of choice and sort of like skill and stuff in my game. And I sort of feel like at this point I've kind of maximized a style around player agency, right? Like I want to create less of a story and more of sort of like a narrative buffet. It would be an okay metaphor for some of this, right? And that I'm trying to give players a lot of real sort of kind of measurable choice that is not present in my estimation some of the other kinds of campaigns that are out there, especially at like adventure path ones, right? And a lot of this I would trace to in my mind Hell's Rebels is sort of like the proto version of this, right, which was an adventure path, but was an adventure path that became a deeply choice driven sort of story, because of the way that I wanted to design some of your interactions with like Bart's Lythrune. This is the one that we bring up all the time on the podcast, right? That you guys chose to ally with the main villain. And that was a choice I felt like I had to really respect. And that's like a sort of guiding tent pole of my, I don't know, like GMing philosophy at this point, which feels different to most other GMs I probably end up talking to these days.
Yeah, it's interesting because like something that the Angry GM says, to go back to well, is that Pathfinder, D&D, these are not games. These are like game design tool sets, and that you are like, Buddy, the GM, is making the game, right? Like, and like there's a scenario designer too who is like a somewhere in between, right? Like, and you're the one actually like making the game, and that's kind of where this kind of rests, right? Because like a lot of the
Oh
stuff
man,
you
that's
do
really interesting.
is like that connective tissue, right? Like, and various games do more or less to systematize some of this stuff, right? Like, like you have tools available to you to design in a level up appropriate encounter if you want to, but by no means is it the end all be all of
Yes,
things.
yeah, I think I would probably I mean, I would maybe agree on a certain level, but my instinct is to disagree with the angry GM on that. I nowadays think of myself as not quite a player in the sense of DM versus player, but a player in the sense of I feel like the system is above me as the GM, and I am also playing the game, right? Sure, I am designing the game, I'm arranging encounters, I'm doing all of this other stuff, but in my role as Dungeon Master, I am also playing the game just as much as the players are. Which is maybe like a philosophical thing
Yeah,
we could,
I feel like
like
that might be
chase
more a
down, but
semantic thing than like a super
yeah.
meaningful thing. Just because, like, I like that you can't just like execute Pathfinder, right? Like this is why
Right.
like Wrath of the Righteous, like why you can make video games out of these things, because those are like games executing on those rules. It's obviously there's computerization behind actually executing those pieces of it, but like you don't have the game without like the particular story and scenario and encounters and whatnot. And I think that's like the thing that he's pointing at, right?
Yeah, I would maybe I guess I would probably agree with that. I do think that this is all sort of like philosophical at a certain
Yeah,
point, but that's a big feeling I have these days, is that I am playing the game alongside my players, rather than I probably wouldn't have described it that way 10 years ago or 15 years ago or something like that, right? Like I probably would be thinking about it and conceiving of it on sort of like a different level, mostly because I feel like my definition of sort of gameplay, all of these kinds of things have changed quite a bit. And alongside of that, some of my sort of like adherence to systems and sort of like the rules, right? Like I feel like a lot of what I'm doing these days in my capacity as kind of DM, as game designer, right, is setting up rules ahead of time in order to kind of flag, sort of procedural consequence kind of stuff, which we've talked about on this cast, right? Like
right.
the artifacts, I tell people, this is how magic items are going to work. That is me inventing a rule, creating a new system as a game designer and introducing it into the world, but it's something I announce ahead of time. People it's not like people just come across 3 artifacts each and they all have these powers and they have a specific sort of like upgrade tree. I explain all of that ahead of time because I feel like it's important as like, I don't know. I just feel like it's important to give players an adequate understanding of where things are going. And if you don't do that, then they come to poor conclusions about what the game is sort of going to play like.
Yeah, that's fair. But uh this is maybe supposed to be a little bit more about your impressions of
Yes.
PF2E. So
Okay. Yeah, definitely. One thing I found, so there's a bunch of stuff that I found interesting. I don't really know where I want to start. One thing that I have found interesting, just on the crunchiest level, okay, because we've had a couple of combats, pretty small. I think combat is going quicker in 2E compared to 5E. And I find that insanely interesting because 5E nominally should be a quicker system, right? You have move, you have action, you have bonus. That's it, right? But there's something about maybe the choice paralysis. It just feels like we were churning through rounds in PF2E in a way that we were not when we were playing Warriors of Kryn, or even when I'm playing in 7th Expedition, which is also sort of a 5E game. And that fact I find deeply compelling. Is that something you feel like is true or is false?
so I will be interested. Like, I don't know what level this game goes to, but my suspicion is, and this has been my experience with higher level games, is that there's going to be like, like D&D is maybe going to start higher, but going to be a little bit flatter, and 2E is going to just kind of like cross it at some point, probably around like,
Sure. Yeah, because I feel like at a certain point you're going to get to a place where you have so many actions that you have available to you that you can do neat stuff with.
Yeah,
right?
and part of the thing that keeps it snappier than say 1E is that like you still for the most part have 3 actions, right? Like even if you get an extra action, it's usually like highly constrained in a way that's like, oh, you can only use that extra action to strike or stride, right? Which is like the classic haste version or something else, right?
Yeah.
Like you can use the extra action to reload or something in a very context specific way. But um part of the thing that starts to take a little bit longer is resolution, and that's just kind of like making sure like this is where a virtual tabletop helps in that like oh, keeping all the bonuses together, or like let's say you roll a crit with your gun that has like guns have like the fatal trait, which means like not only do you roll the extra dice, you roll an extra die on top of it, and then like it's a fire gun, it's got like a fire rune on it, so it's rolling an extra d6 that gets doubled, right? Like that kind of thing. And so sometimes things take longer to resolve, or like you know you cast a big AoE spell that like requires everybody within the area to make a will save with one of 4 outcomes, right? Like those things can take time, and then like if they have lingering effects, this can take more time to resolve. So I think that like it can get long on the other end, especially I think with some of the monsters. The monsters because the monsters tend to have not only the normal set of things, but they have bespoke stuff to them, and so it is harder for the GM to run off of kind of like inbuilt memory of how the characters work, right? Like like I always know how to run my character, but like the GM is running a Baylor and then a Red Dragon and then like a pack of gnolls, and they all have slightly different things to them that like
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I wonder if that will be different because I'm doing so many
hmm.
custom sort of like monsters and stuff like that. I felt that side of things actually is pretty nice. I don't think I have a good sense for like numbers and stuff like that yet. Like I can run D&D 5e stuff. This is something I just like I can intuit those numbers really really well. And so even though I do have stat blocks for all of the monsters I introduce and I basically only do custom monsters, I can't even think of a time in 7th Expedition where I've run with a monster that is not custom designed by me for that game. Which is not how I intend to do things, but just like I'm designing from sort of a lore first perspective rather than like it's not like, oh, what are the cool things that are in this prison? No, I knew it from step 1. There's a beacon, and at the beacon there are these ghosts, and they come in 3 different levels: Spirit, Spectre, Revenant, and like I couldn't retrofit stuff to fit that archetype. I was designing the lore before I was designing sort of the mechanics. Um, but the one thing I really like about that is they have these benchmarks that are really neat and easy to use, where you can just kind of go, let's just make it about level 5, and then I can tinker from there. Because like I love this feeling of being able to look, just like eyeball something, and then kind of go, okay, well, these things, they're carrying a shield, so he has bupa, or also they have fast healing, so bupa, like tinkering on that kind of level off of a template is way way easier than trying to like design something from the ground up and then go, this is about a level 6 creature. You know what I mean? Like I have no idea what that kind of thing sort of feels like. And the other thing I really like is the bespoke nature of so many monsters actions. It makes me feel like I'm pretty free to do whatever the fuck I want. Obviously you guys fought the Revenants and you got to see a lot of their mechanics, right? They summon these balls of light. The balls of light interact with their kind of meager spell casting, so like they can just do that blinding flash whenever they want, right? But they can also summon the ball of light and then have the ball of light move, and then the flash comes out of the ball of light, right? That kind of thing is like all of that just gets adjudicated through sort of actions. Whereas in 5e, a lot of what I do is I do bonus action work. Basically, all of my sort of interesting monsters, let's say, have bonus actions or alternatively kind of sometimes reactions that make their stuff more compelling. So a Minotaur, for instance, they have a charge attack, and then they have a bonus action War Stomp. And the War Stomp doesn't do very much damage, but it hits everybody in melee. And if you take damage from it, you lose your, or I think it's actually if it hits. It's not if you take damage from it. It's if it hits, you lose your reaction, right? So what this means that the Minotaur can do is charge in to a group of people, attack, War Stomp, right? And then on their next move, they War Stomp, charge out without taking any AOs. And so you have to kind of glom onto them and not let them like move or whatever. And then there's like other creatures that have That like that's sort of the top-down design that you have to do in 5e in order to kind of like comport with things. But in Pathfinder, I'm so free to do whatever I want. And I actually really also took to heart the idea that I don't really want my monsters attacking more than once per turn. They should always have another interesting thing to do, which is why, I'm going to summon the ball of light. I'm going to cast these nets that are trying to restrain people, all of these other kinds of things that are kind of in the way. And that's just with like the Revenant side of things, right? That obviously doesn't hit kind of any of the other combat encounters that we could go for. Even though I didn't quite run the Skaven correctly because I had in fact designed the Skaven, but I didn't have the stat block on me at the time. And so in the last session, I kept forgetting that they had that thing where when they're below half health and you target them with an attack, they can use their reaction to move after taking the damage. And so theoretically, they're supposed to be scurrying all around and doing all of this other kind of stuff. But I wasn't doing a great job of running that combat offhand.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the thing that's nice too is there's just like so much there, right? Like, I can tell you that there is a pretty standardized reaction. I forget what it's called, but it's called like nimble dodge or something like that. It's like take a 5-foot step, add 2 to your AC. If it makes it can potentially make that attack miss, right? Like would hit you. You take a 5-foot step, that adds 2 to your AC. If that makes the attack miss, the attack misses, right? Like it's which I think is like like there's many things there, right? Like all these custom abilities you're doing, there's either an analog for it, or like at the very least there's like well-defined DCs so that you don't have to wonder about how all of that works, right? Like you can just be like, oh, this is what the DC is, and we'll do a standard save, and the standard kind of like critical success, failure, critical failure bottle, I think works super well for that.
That's honestly probably the hardest part for me at the moment. I sort of knew this was going to be the case, but adjudicating the 4 different levels of it, and also setting DCs is hard because in 5e it just is an easier snap decision to make because you don't have that extra step of what does a critical success or failure mean, right? But in this, those things do matter, like materially, to sort of the progress, the process of how it all sort of works. And so there are moments where I feel like I am slower than I ought to be because I have to kind of process a little bit. It takes twice as much processing power to figure out what the new failure and success levels are associated with this thing. And then there's also stuff where it rolls like you would probably say this is not great, but there's stuff in 5e that the player will roll and it's so high that you don't even really have to set the DC for it. You know what I mean? Where it's like someone rolls, you go, can I roll an athletics check for that? And I go, sure. And when I say sure, the player automatically rolls and they're going to tell me, and they're going to say, I rolled a 23. If in that space of 3 seconds, I didn't assign a number to this, I just happen to know that 23 is very fucking high and probably succeeds. And I don't have to kind of retroactively like assign a DC. It just succeeds. But you can't do that in Pathfinder. You always have to have the DC, and I don't think it's fair unless you have the DC ahead of time. So I'm always trying to think ahead of time before I tell someone they can roll something. I always go, they'll be like, can I roll a thing for this? And I have to compute for a second. Like, okay, what is the fair DC for this? 14. Okay, cool. Yes, go for it. You know what I mean? And that introduces sort of like extra time for some of these things.
No, that makes sense. And I think that's something that'll come with time too, right? Like, you'll have the standard DCs in your head. But I also think part of this too is that you shouldn't feel obligated to have something in all of those 4 slots, right? Like a very common thing for say a static monster aura will be that a successful save does nothing, critical save doesn't get you anything else. If you succeed on a save, like a fear aura, you succeed on a save, no fear effect. Critical success, who cares? Failure, frightened 1, critical failure, frightened 2, right? And you just kind of let it roll from there. And it's fine. And so that I think is definitely a big part of it is knowing when to, and also relying on the basic save thing, which I think is a great innovation, which is if you don't have anything else to say, critical success, no damage, success, half damage, failure, full damage, critical failure, double damage, right? And then like if you
Yep.
want to put a little bit of spice in, you put like a rider on the critical failure. Because like that's a common thing too. It's like, critical, basic fortitude, but on a critical failure slowed one type of deal.
Yeah. I think one of the toughest things that we haven't really dealt with in our game so far is really cracking to the next level, maybe I would say, of um, some of those aspects of the game in a way. So kind of what I mean by that is I'm thinking about like how exploration heavy the game is at the moment. We are almost always doing exploration stuff. That seems to really be kind of the core of what we're going after is exploration basically. But like exploration in Pathfinder is adjudicated by so many of these extra sort of like things. Like it's not, hey, can I roll a perception check? It's, can I take the seek action? Right? Oh, I'd like to roll a knowledge check on this thing. It's no, can I roll recall knowledge? Right? And the fact that they have kind of assigned these things names is like a weird. That's like a weird thing. To my brain. I don't know. How do you feel about that kind of stuff?
I mean, part of it's that I'm in it, but it does well to like kind of separate out what's happening sometimes, right? Like, if I am rolling intimidate in a conversation, that's like kind of a base intimidation check. If I'm rolling it in combat for its combat function, that's a demoralize, right? There's also this aspect that like maybe you haven't dug into, but there are like specific exploration actions which are like you can like theoretically, like when we're traveling overland. I don't know if it works so well for like the prison camp stuff. Is like, let's say we were going from like the camp to like the border or something, right? Like be like, oh, one character will be searching, one character will be scouting, one character will be repeating a spell, one character will be stealthing, right? And like these are things you all pick, and you can go for it. It's actually a nice tool set too, because like like if we want to sneak around the camp, we all want to sneak around the camp. This will be relevant when we hit level 3 and presumably somebody takes expert in stealth, right? Like, oh, we can all follow the expert. And so like, Lomareth, who doesn't have any ranks in stealth, can like get like, at least a base level of kind of like competence in it. And so, it's not terrible for everything. So I think those systems are well built. The naming doesn't bother me so much, but again, that's just mostly because I think I know most of it at this point. But I see your point that like parceling it out feels weird. I think part of that is so that like all 70 billion feats can like interact in the correct way, right? Like
Yeah, this is exactly what I was thinking. It removes the ambiguity of circumstance, right? So basically, you can give someone, it's not you get an extra +3 to perception. It's you get a bonus to using the seek action, right? When you use the seek action, you get a +2 on your perception check, which allows you to sort of selectively buff and nerf sort of things. You have more tuning levers basically because you can parcel out some of the aspects that would otherwise be a little bit like tougher to determine, right? So in 5e, for instance, there aren't all of these kinds of actions, but they do exist sort of like feats or class abilities that interact with some of these things. And they might say, when you are stealthing in the forest, you get a +2 circumstance bonus for like that kind of, for moving overland, or you get a plus on your survival bonus in order to track a foe. Well, now all of that stuff is just like parceled out, right? And we know what a recall knowledge check is. We know what a this other kind of like an identify monster check or something kind of along those lines. And so having all of that stuff have a bespoke name basically gives, I think, that extra sort of tuning lever. But I think it's mostly there for, I have mostly been ignoring it because I think of it as being there for kind of Pathfinder Society, basically, right? Like it is there to, when you are sitting down, it's kind of like pugging or something, right? Like it is there to help a player who isn't intensely familiar with the GM have a level of power to, sort of push back against a GM who's treating them sort of like unfairly, or to enforce kind of aspects of a system, assuming, you know, you don't have a deep level of personal familiarity, I feel like, with your dungeon master. Because if you do, then the dungeon master just gives you your circumstance bonus when you're due, right? They remember this about your character and they understand like all of those kinds of things. You can't guarantee any of that stuff in Pathfinder society.
Yeah, I also think part of it is just kind of like, you know, that the system is more mechanized, right? Like it's more designed for like, oh, like if you want to say you're very good at, cooking sausages, you take, craft cooking or like lore chef, culinary or whatever, right? Like, um, and so like, and there's a way to mechanically express that other than kind of like, like there is like a bad faith version of things where it's like, oh, well, my character, is like the Omni Man, right? And so like he's like, a self-reliant one-man traveling, master, jack of all trades, so I should get a circumstance bonus to basically everything. It's like, that's kind of bullshit. Whereas like in Pathfinder, you can take a jack of all trades feat, right? Like humans have something like that. That's like, kind of like you're okay at everything, right? Um, and I think that's part, like, it's like there's less arguing or there's less kind of like push pulling for circumstantial bonuses because a lot of that is mechanically expressed, straight out. Which is both a positive and a negative, I think. But it's like you have a, like, this is the thing that we used to talk about in 1E, right? Like, there was a point at which, I don't know if you were in this game or if it was a different game. It was like, oh, we all wanted to speak sign language with each other, so we all spent one of our languages on like a shared sign language, and that worked. And then like a year later, in like one of the 72 splat books that they put out in that year, there was a feat for it. It's like, oh, well, I guess the feat implies that you can't do that anymore. You have to take the feat to do it, that kind of thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
Which I think they're better about with 2E, but that's always there.
Yeah, I do think that the delineation between exploration, downtime, and combat, do they call it combat? Do they call it interaction or something like that? They call it something different,
it's
right?
called encounter, I think.
Encounter, right? Yeah, yeah. Because I also know that it also accounts for you're talking to someone in dialogue, right? One of these is second to second, one of these minute to minute, hour to hour thing. I think that delineation is pretty good, and I like it quite a lot. I also love the idea of downtime activities. I like the idea that, and I did this for cultist, right? Like, I like the idea that I can give someone a feat, or like someone could be like, hey, I want to make for my archetype, I want to make a custom feat that does this kind of thing. And it's like, okay, cool. Here is a custom downtime activity that only you can do because you took the feat for it, sort of thing. And now it has unlocked this special button that you can press that is that downtime activity button. I think that's great. Like, that's like a lot of fun. It unfortunately doesn't trigger in Heretic Heroes very much because, I mean, a lot of this is that Heretic Heroes is a very abnormal sort of setup for a game. You guys don't have any equipment, right? You have to deal with the pentabands. You're kind of constantly on watch. This is something I was talking about quite a lot, about the tension pool, right? How the tension pool is sort of always active for you guys because you're sort of always in exploration mode in a way. Like, there really aren't moments where you would be considered to be not tense, or like where the tension pool could not have a chance of triggering, right? Um, but like if you were playing another kind of game, right? Like, let's assume that you were playing that Fangs of Our Fathers, right? Like the noble houses and the beastmen sort of game. Like, yeah, sure, when you're out hunting beastmen, the tension pool can trigger. But like when you are in a city and you're negotiating with nobles, it probably doesn't, right? It is the kind of thing that's kind of shut off. But part of that, I just think, is like, the gameplay systems are following the lore and the narrative that I have set up, and not the other way around.
Yeah, and like there's a version of things like maybe we decide like, we are going to, lay low for like a month and just work, right? Like then you can just kind of like do downtime rules, but I don't see our party doing that, right? Like,
Yeah.
Like also just, not exact, like that's the type of, like, it is a doable thing in this situation, just kind of not like it. it's nice because it's the type of thing where, like, if for whatever reason we decided, oh, we need to actually hold out for this, like, you can kind of yada 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 over the time, right, and like
Yeah,
actually have
I mean,
something
you can
happening
imagine
there.
there could be like, version of thing. You guys obviously found the library. Imagine you didn't, I don't know, trigger the soul storm and all of the rest of this kind of thing, and you found some good consistent way to like whatever, dig a tunnel to the library, and you cleared out all the Skaven, and now you say, okay, I want to spend a month and we're just going to go through the library, we're going to read all those books, and it's like, okay, cool, great. Like that would maybe theoretically be like downtime, but it's just like at that point it's such a sort of edge case, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that game is about a very clear purpose. We are escaping the prison, and um
Yeah, like
I it's hard to think of.
maybe if we were like doing like True Grit Escape, right? It's like, okay, we have
Yeah.
set everything up, and there's like basically no chance or very little chance of us ever getting caught. We are going to spend a month just tunneling out of the prison camp, right?
Oh, that's true. That was something that I had thought of. Did we talk about this last week on the podcast?
Uh, uh
Or 2 weeks ago on the podcast? Tunneling out of the prison?
I don't
Did I
think.
have that conversation with somebody else? Yeah, this is the thing. I was trying to explain. Oh, this is also a friend of the cast here. I was trying to explain how the reason I knew the Skaven were there was because I conceived of them when I thought that you guys might tunnel out. I was like, there has to be a reason that if they try and tunnel out, there's a blocker there. That can't just be the solution. The solution cannot be, oh, we found some shovels and we snuck them into our house and we're going to spend a month just digging the tunnel, right? It's like, oh, no, you dig down 5 feet, you open up into the trench works, and there are fucking Skaven, and now you have to deal with the Skaven before you can actually progress along that sort of, like along that sort of line. Which I like that detail, because when it came to the library, and I also knew that there was that thing under the library is the other thing. It all flowed together. I wasn't thinking about there being Skaven in that room. That only really happened when Josh rolled the nat one, and I was like, you know what, this is a good representation. It is not just that you have found where they are tossing old library books into a hole to rot and go away or whatever. This is also, there are Skaven nests in here, and there are Skaven in them, and you have been walking around Skaven kind of like this entire time. But all of that only really ever triggers because I was crafting the particular lock of this, of this particular thing. And I guess maybe I'm explaining that I wasn't trying to find a good way that solve the problem of incarceration via downtime.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's, I feel like that'd be an interesting thing to talk through once we're out of, like as kind of like a design challenge, later on. But like, that makes sense, right? Like the Skaven are always there to like, it's like that's a thing. That means you can't, that's not how you solve this particular problem. That's neat. How do you feel about like the 3 action system in encounter mode in general?
I basically ignore it out of combat,
Right.
which I think is technically wrong, but whatever. I don't care.
I mean, there are places where you could theoretically run it in encounter mode, right? But like most things don't actually get run in encounter mode, right?
Yeah, does anybody? Yeah, exactly. I can't possibly believe that anybody actually adjudicates an encounter around a conversation. Like
Yeah,
maybe a very important one that you set up like a skill challenge or whatever. But I just don't think like the most simple. You need to get into the city and you need to convince the guard, and the face of the party is going to walk up and roll a persuasion or whatever diplomacy. The Nobody runs that in encounter mode, right?
no, and
By
I don't think it's
raw,
supposed.
you
I don't
would.
think you're supposed to, right? Like,
Oh, really?
yeah. Like encounter mode is basically just combat, and like things that are like directly combat adjacent, right? Like, like maybe you're not actually like stabbing the Skaven right now, but you're trying to run up a ladder before the Skaven, bites you in the ass or whatever, right? Like, maybe you do that in encounter mode and in rounds, but almost everything
Yeah,
else.
I have this thing about retreating. This really came by Seventh Expedition because there have been a couple of times in Seventh Expedition where the players have had to retreat because they're just really low, and so they get they get ambushed. They're all really exhausted because of overland travel, kind of like that sort of stuff. And so then I have this thing about when they reach the edge of the combat map, they walk off the edge of the map, and then there's sort of a chase encounter, but it's off the map, and you just get one thing. You're still in turn order, but you just go, I use athletics to run fast. I use acrobatics to do parkour through a complicated section of whatever and slow the bad guys down. Like that kind of stuff, right? And that's technically being run in encounter mode, but I'm not doing 3 actions. I'm really just kind of like doing one sort of thing. I theoretically want to port that forward to Pathfinder, but it wouldn't really port all that cleanly because in 5e you just get 1 action a turn. That's pretty intuitive. But in Pathfinder, when I get to a position where people are like, "Well, I want to roll 3 checks because it's whatever."
There are chase rules for PF2E if you want to look them up. I feel like this is one of those things where like they don't feel particularly like I've done a couple of chases and it's like, oh, you like roll successful. Like I find like a lot of kind of extended skill things tend to be like I roll the skill check and like there's not like a lot of like it is way too easy to be like I will roll my highest skill. Now, did I beat the DC? Hooray! I have advanced the success tracker by 1 or 2 marks, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
which is like not compelling gameplay, right? Like you have to kind of like force things into kind of like a, oh, this is what I'm actually doing, and you know how do I like you want players to do ideally, you know, cool badass thought first, and then like you know, and like which skill to target second, right? Like but you know that can be hard, especially with you know with mechanics conscious players, right? Like
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this as maybe the Rufus the Red problem, right? Where Nick was playing the rogue Rufus who had superpower, who had just like the most insane acrobatics, and it was just Rufus was going to resolve every skill check possible as an acrobatics check if you would let him. And I feel like that is kind of what happens in some of these. But I also think that the opposite is not necessarily all that true. Like I do think that theoretically there ought to be a good failure rate for something like this, like maybe 10% or something, right? Like Seventh Expedition is maybe a bad example, but like a version of things where you fail the chase and you have to re-enter a combat that you tried to run away from is actually very compelling to me. But it ought to only happen rarely, right? Like that's why I say 10%, right? That's the kind of thing that would trigger what once every 20 sessions or something like that, right? Like how often are you in a combat where the goal is run away rather than sort of escape? But I really like the idea of a chase that has, and maybe that's kind of it. If there is not a real failure chance, then I feel like I would probably say it's not like worth it. But if the failure chance is real and material and could fuck your shit up, right? Like, you know, then that's then the sort of compelling aspect of it is the stakes of that sort of situation, maybe.
yeah, and I think like there's actually not as much daylight between like the best way to do this and like you know kind of like the hacky way. And it's just a matter of like, oh, my burly barbarian is going to knock over some boxes to block the person chasing me. That's an athletics check, and like you want the player to like say that instead of I roll an athletics check first off, right?
Yeah.
Like you know. And
Yep.
naturally, you know, like the barbarian isn't going to try and cast prestidigitate, right? He's going to try and knock over the boxes, whereas the you know the wizard is going to you know try and like prestidigitate like a you know a fake wall or like illusory object, a fake wall or something like that.
Yeah,
Right?
there's an interesting thing there, which I don't know how I feel about it in a way. Because on a sort of game design level, I think I probably think this stuff is bad because it is just so obvious that you argue your way into your best skill, right? But I also think that that process is maybe actually good in a way, like forcing a player to come up with a justification for why a skill that ought not apply does is actually pretty compelling, you know, sort of stuff. That's like the sort of friction and tension that D&D ought to sort of be built around. You know, a face who is running through the crowd and using deception to scream that there is a, you know, there are bandits on the loose to get the guards to like collapse on them or whatever. That's a clever way of using a skill that we wouldn't normally associate with the physical act of running away. And the act of doing that is a good thing that I want my players to do, even if I think underlying sort of systems are not all that great at sort of supporting it, because I probably do agree about the success tracker for, you know, for this stuff, right? For like gaining on someone you're chasing or trying to break away from someone you're chasing kind of thing.
Yeah, I think part of this is staging, right? Like, and by staging, I mean like set
Yeah.
dressing maybe is the better way to put it, right? Like,
Mise en scène would maybe be like the
yeah,
filmmaking term for this.
right. Like, ideally, like if you leave it too loose, right? If you're like, you're you're in an other like until this point undefined featureless boys like I find some boxes and knock them over, right? Like maybe you want to say like, oh, you're in a barren alley, right? Like with high walls, what do you do, right? Like he's running down like you set the team to kind of like constrain their vision, right? Like like, oh, we're in a city, can I call the guards, right? Like um versus kind of like if you leave it a little too loose, then like then you get the kind of like, well, I will find a narrow balance beam to acrobatics across, right? Like that kind of thing. But like as long as you can like the thing you want to avoid, we've talked about this, going back years and years, right? Is like avoid the thing where like you can just slot in the thing thoughtlessly, right? Like like I always call the guards because there's like no reason ever not to, right? Because like the chase is defined that loosely that like sure there's probably guards within earshot, and that's not to say that like there aren't times when that's fine, but like also just kind of like you want to make it such that that doesn't become kind of like the kind of like press button receive good skill check thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I have this thing about perceivable consequence. I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, right? Like that part of the game is about perceivable, like most games I feel like are about perceivable consequence. I should have a level of understanding that if I engage this game mechanic, this is the thing that is going to kind of come out the other side, right? That is fundamentally a pretty good thing to happen. In a lot of this stuff, but I also think that runs up against the simulationist kind of imperative that a lot of us sort of have. So for instance, in Heretic Heroes, I described Raylana. So you guys freed that paladin Raylana. Raylana casts an Entangling Roots. Okay, this makes sense. She's a paladin of Bullrun. Bullrun is the life god. Sure, this is a baron, whatever, but it's a spell. Who cares, kind of thing. And I did hand wave that a little bit, but because the thing that I wanted to do was, if you accomplish the bonus objective of this combat, which was free the person who is trapped by these revenants, right? If you accomplish that, you don't have to do the chase scene, right? The revenants don't chase you because she kind of takes care of them, sort of thing. And I think when I explain it that way, it's very like logical, but it does sort of reduce a little bit of the magic of the moment, right? That's the simulationist tendency that I kind of want to preserve. But I also want to like give players the perceivable consequence sometimes and let them have a good understanding of what's what's happening, what's coming next, what can they expect to happen, so that they don't blame, they have an opportunity to sort of introspect rather than just raw blame the system, right? The tension pool is maybe a good example of this, right? Like having an understanding in a vague sense that a reckless action rolls the tension pool and a cautious action fills the tension pool. That's supposed to be a perceivable consequence, but it's not like you can't follow that by sort of raw. You always have to make arbitrary decisions as the GM, and that reduces this level of perceivable consequence. So that it creates this sort of tension that I think is interesting. It's complicated to kind of navigate and get to the other side of.
Well, I agree with that. I do think that like I slightly disagree with you on some of your implementation. Like there was one point during the game where I asked you if this would roll the tension pool, and I think it would have been fine for you to just say like, yes, that is risky enough that it will roll the tension pool.
Okay.
And like I'm not saying you're wrong for saying that for not telling us, right? Like that's like a personal choice, but I think that that's like a level of like like this thing that's loud. That's the type of thing that even if you just said like that's the type of thing that could roll the tension pool, right? Like I don't think that that's out of bounds, but like
oh man, this is super interesting. Yeah, I totally understand that, and I do think that it's complicated,
yeah,
because I think that's correct, but the thing I'm trying to preserve there is choice, right? Like I hate the idea that my thumb is on the scale. I want you guys, like I said earlier in the podcast, right? Like I want you guys to have maximum sort of agency, and yeah, I do think it's sort of frustrating to hear I can't tell you that, right? And then you do the thing, and the thing that you expected does or doesn't happen, or whatever. Like I totally get that, but the thing that I'm trying to say is it's your choice. You make the decision, and don't let me make the decision for you, because I feel like what happens in some situations like that is the players are asking the GM to be the tiebreaker on a decision making point, and it's like that should never be the case, right? The GM should not be the one breaking the tie in order to set the player's plan in motion. The players should be committing to the plan on their own, right? But obviously the counter argument to this is that you're asking for a rules clarification, which a GM ought to give you, right? If you held up your D20 and went, do I, I'm making an attack action. Do I roll my D20 now? And I said, I can't tell you that. That's bullshit. Yes, obviously, I'm supposed to say you can roll the D20 because you're just asking for rules clarification.
Yeah, and so like I can see why you're afraid of that in situations that would be that would be like similar, that would like maybe encroach in that territory. But I also think that like it's a legitimate thing for us as a party to say, oh, do we want to incur the consequence of having to roll the tension pool, right? Like this is kind of like oh, I need like a like a 16 to 20 to get this skill check to pass, right? Like, oh, let's go for it. And like, yes, I got it, right? Like like same thing as in the opposite way. It's like, this will make it quicker, but then we're gonna have to roll the pool. There's 4 dice in it. Go for it. No one's, yeah, right? Like we live to suck another day, that kind of thing.
I love that. Yeah, see, this is funny. I love that. I think that's great. But I do think that it is sort of the mechanized there, there's 2 sides of that coin, right?
Sure.
The affirmative side of that coin, the side that I like, is that it just uses the raw mechanic itself to create the tension in the moment, the tension and release of the moment. This is why one of the things I was talking about also at PAX, also with Sarian, was actually a bunch of people, Raylon and Frank, a bunch of people were there. Ought we have an ability to remove dice from the tension pool? Okay. It was like, hey, if I make a proactive decision that is reducing our risk. So for instance, Rachel did a thing where she was distracting a guard in order to, dampen the chances that a die gets added to the tension pool. We roll the tension pool, something along those lines. Maybe that action ought to have pulled a die out of the tension pool, right? Instead, I was like, oh, very interesting. But I actually think that's wrong. And the reason why is because the tension pool isn't about managing. It's like the tension pool has to be an inevitability.
Yeah.
If you can pull the tension pool to 0, then the gameplay is all about maximizing extreme sort of over vigilance, maybe I would sort of say. If the tension pool is fundamental and always rollable, and once a die is in there, it's getting rolled eventually, whether by risk or by filling, it's going to roll, right? That inevitability is what I think creates the real sort of sense of tension.
I agree, and I also think that kind of like misunderstands what the tension pool is. It's not like a 1-to-1 simulationist risk, right? It's an abstraction of like the accumulation of risky actions, right? Like, and you roll when you do something dangerous because you kind of like bringing that all to a head. But like, like at least it's kind of as originally conceived. You're a little bit off from the Angry GM's, which is not in a way that I think that's bad, but like it's kind of like as you are doing these time-consuming things, you have like if you are picking a lock, right, like in a heavily guarded fortress, there's a chance that a guard walks by, right, and that's what adding a die to the tension pool is. It's kind of like the accumulated kind of like if you integrate over all of the actions that you do, right, like whether it's picking the lock that causes the guard because you did it later in the thing, but the first thing, if it's the first thing you do, maybe it doesn't, right? Like it's just kind of like a part of all of that. And also like part of it is that like you resolve them all pretty immediately, but like as originally conceived, it's also not a thing that you have to, right? Like you can hold it for like a little while, like you're not supposed to hold it super long, but you can hold it for a little while to be like something's coming, right? Like
yeah, the big thing about my implementation of the tension pool that I feel like is different is that I have mechanized sort of not quite story event, but just like narrative stuff is garbled up in there, right? So the obvious example is sort of like the soul storm, but there's obviously other aspects of those things that are in the tension pool and are sort of rollable. And I think of myself as the tension pool kind of having 2 modes. And I think technically speaking, I probably think the complication table is wrong. I would maybe say that the best version of the tension pool doesn't have a complication table. It just has you roll a complication and the GM comes up with one that is circumstantially appropriate, right? And you just kind of invest that power in their improvisational sort of like storytelling, right? But the thing that I really connected to on the complication table is, oh, I can use this as a way to sort of not quite mechanize random encounters, but capture some of that feeling, right? The uncertainty in the story that is even outside of my control, right? Where I am not setting up the next story element. Your actions, you rolled a thing in the tension pool, and I told you something cryptic, and all that meant was a thing was happening outside of your line of sight somewhere else, but I know that we triggered this thing, right? This happens all the time in 7th Expedition because they've played much longer, and so they have memorized aspects application table, right? So when they roll a 17 or something like that, they may have memorized what the 17 represents. And when I go, you find yourself thinking about the rinds on the fruit that you ate earlier that day and realize you just you just created a trail of breadcrumbs for your pursuers, right? Like that's like one of them, right? They've triggered that one a bunch of times at this point, right? Like maybe like 5 or 6 sort of times. They don't know what that does technically, but like it does, I don't know, kind of key into some of this stuff. And I feel like that is like the thing that the angry GM doesn't quite capture in the way that I run the attention pool.
Yeah, I think that there is a kind of a like I think how do I want to put this? I think having things be more vague towards the middle and more specific towards the end, or like you can also keep it vaguer on the outside, but like I think it's like the way you've done it is the right way to do it because like I think like an unexpected ally appears, right? Like,
Oh yeah,
I think is vague enough for you to do like a, you know, like an unexpected ally appears, and maybe I'm assuming there's one of these, maybe there is, but like an 8 is like an unexpected antagonist appears or something like that, right? Like having it be that vague gives you enough to like do something contextual, whereas like having kind of like the big things on the end that are set in stone, like because I do think there's some value to like, oh, we rolled the soul storm and you feel like your hands are tied to like not contextually like do something lesser, right? Like I think that was a very cool moment, right? But like having that be occasional, I actually think the I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but like having like the less set in stone things in the middle and the more set in stone things on.
That's absolutely what I because I thought when I think of it's about the D8 plus the D12.
Right.
Obviously I know that 8 times 12 is 96, and so you're creating, I just visualize this in my head, you're creating that table of outcomes, and then the diagonals are each of the numbers, and you know that there is essentially a 1%, the soulstorm triggering, there's a 1% chance of that, right? So when I'm assigning something to 20 or conversely to 2, right, I know that there's about 1% chance that they're sort of all this thing, and I just put it on there because it's like this would be, like this would be crazy. This would be kind of cool. Obviously, in the moment, the funny part about that is that in the moment, it I took a moment that I thought of as being climactic. I kind of thought the whole little arc was going to end with the soul storm, or might end with the soul storm. There's a couple of other things that could happen, right? And I instead took it and made it an inciting incident. I was thinking about this in screenwriting terms, right? Where it's like, it is not that you are building towards the soul storm where there's crazy shit happening around the beacon and you can feel it's getting more and more unstable, and then boom, the soul storm happens. It's like one version of the story that could have happened theoretically, right? Like if I chose to kind of tell it that way. It is instead everything, like everything seems normal, and then this crazy thing that nobody has ever experienced before happens. Half the people in the prison have just died, right? Like now it's all going, it's all weird, it's all wrong, there's a timer now, right? What's going on with this beacon, right? We have to get to the bottom of this kind of thing. And I feel like that was, that's like the way that you have to sort of deal with a written out complication table is an unlikely ally appears, morphs to the circumstances of the moment. The soulstorm triggers, even that morphs to the circumstances of the moment. It replaces a different version of a plot point with something that is more contextually kind of appropriate.
Yeah. What would the magical elephant do in the moment? Who knows?
Do you feel like playing 2 and against the tension pool is good or bad?
So what do you mean by that?
This is so the argument would go if I were, like let's say I was making this argument, it would be something like when I am making a decision based on the state of the tension pool, I am pulling myself out of the immersive feeling of being my character, right? And I am instead embracing the mechanics of the game, which are not which are not immersive, right? Or maybe another version of this would be that when there is that moment of sort of tension and release that gets made when you go, hey, if I go roll the tension pool, you pull 4 dice, you roll them, and there are no ones. Oh, that relief is not about anything narrative or storytelling. It's happening raw on a raw mechanics level, and that's I don't know, that's bad.
So I think that that's again a thing about mise en scène. Maybe this means that maybe there should be more mechanics for clearing the like resetting the pool. Essentially, is what I'm calling. It's like we all go to sleep and it's like, well, we didn't do any, but like what it's supposed to be is like like I said, we're in this library, we're sneaking around, right? It's like kind of like we should be like looking, peering out the windows. Is somebody going to come in here? Are we going to get caught? Has anybody realized that we're not in our room anymore? That's kind of what it's supposed to be representative of, right? And I think that works. And I think I think like playing around it, right? Like is good in the sense that like, oh, we like knocked over a bookshelf at the library. That made a big noise. That rolls the tension pool. That makes sense, right? Like, and like maybe you kind of like mush the edges of it a little bit when it's like, oh, well, we rolled the tension pool and it did a thing that wasn't actually about the tension in the situation directly. I don't think that's too bad as long as, like, if we roll the tension pool in like the basement and that's what caused the Skaven to come out, right? It's like, well, that's kind of a different thing than like what we should be narratively tense about, right? Like but maybe not, right? Like you could, like, the fact that we're rolling one source of tension into another isn't necessarily the end of the world. I think in like in like the in the purest form of this, right? Like once we go into the basement, it's a different source of tension. It's like, what the fuck is happening in this creepy basement, right? Like, we hear things skittering. Are we going to, disturb something? Are we going to like, knock the corpse down the well in Moria, right? And alert the orc, which is effectively what the Skaven thing is the fact that the tension pool crossed from like the prison tension to the basement tension not perfectly.
Does that reset the pool? Yeah,
yeah,
like,
like
no, right?
the fact that that's not perfectly narratively aligned, I think, is that's a thing that kind of like the price that like mechanics pays to abstraction, right? Like, and I think that's mostly fine, right? And or in the sense that like it is a piece of narrative tension that isn't like a piece of simulationist tension, if that makes sense, right? Like, like in a story, you get these moments where like tension is building. That doesn't necessarily wouldn't necessarily like build tension if you had a real-world series of events like this, right? But like because the story is building tension. Does this make sense at all to you? Right? Like,
I totally get this. Because I was thinking about this as I think about this as sort of like a gameplay. I think actually about this as perceivable consequence more than anything else, right? Like I need to be able to give players an opportunity to react to the uncertainty that their actions are causing. So a different way to put that. Let's assume all things are equal. We're exploring this library. You knock over the bookshelf, right? Without the tension pool, you might knock over the bookshelf, and I might go, nothing happens. Or I might go, a guard shows up, right? That is not something that I gave players a real sort of true way to interact with on a systems level, right? They can interact with it kind of on a narrative level. We might intuit the idea that, oh, we're sneaking around, and if we make a loud noise, someone could be sort of alerted. Okay, you're sure, you're right. But like on a raw systems level, there's nothing to have this perceivable consequence kind of like happen, right? And the tension pool introduces that, right? And I think of these two things as being sort of like hand in hand, right? I don't think of them as being opposed forces. I think of them as being sort of combined forces, right? I feel like when people are feeling sort of the mechanical tension of tension pool. It is a mechanical representation of the tension, but it is just kind of a hit of that moment happening outside of the direct control of sort of the narrative. And the thing that I would compare it to is music. You know how in like a tense, movie, you would have the violins, the thing, and then you might have a big like moment, right? Like that's rolling the tension pool. And sometimes that happens in movies. Oh, nothing happens. Door opens, you hear a crash, everybody looks over. Oh my god, it's just a rat, right? That's rolling the tension pool, but rolling no ones, right? But when you look over and there's the fucking serial killer or something, like that's where you roll a complication kind of thing. And so in the same way that I would say the music is not happening on a narrative level, right? It's outside of the diegesis and everything else. I think the tension pool is doing that exact same thing, but instead of happening on the musical level, it's happening on the gameplay level, which is what I like probably most about it. Outside of the fact that I like the way that it helps just kind of deal with narrative story kind of stuff. And I don't know. I just think that that part I think is fun and neat and helps me design the overall construction of these adventures. But on like the moment to moment level, I do kind of like it when people game the tension pool and think of the tension pool while they are submerged in all of this stuff, um, all wrapped up together.
I just had a thought. It's like the last scene of The Sopranos is like adding the 6 die to the tension pool. It's like rolling those dice is like, what? Who's it gonna be, right? Like, but yeah, I absolutely agree with you on all of that.
So by the way, see in the chat, Jackie Chan Opera Singer and Gabe Stetson, okay, both say you just got to play the game and ignore the tension pool, schmension pool. I actually think this is correct. Like this is what I mean about the tension pool being an inevitability. I will not use any names, but there have been players of mine who have found the tension pool to be particularly kind of like a frustrating sort of experience. And I think part of that is sort of like a refusal to accept not quite the validity of the system, but it's really the best word I have for it. Like, accept the validity of the system. It feels like for people who just kind of accept that it's a thing and it's going to happen and they just do whatever they do anyway, that's great, right? Like, that's the kind of, that's what I would expect out of sort of like most players. But when you're sort of fighting against the tension pool and assuming that you can control it, it's kind of like saying that it's like fighting a river or like the tide or something like that. It's like building your sandcastle in the wet sand at low tide, and then you just kind of have to assume that sandcastle's gone. Okay, you have to accept that tension pool exists. It's the same sort of feeling in my mind.
So Jackie Chan Opera says I'm not going to do things because I might trigger the tension pool. I think this is actually an aspect of role playing, right? Rusty should not care that he's triggering the tension pool because that's the kind of character Rusty is. Lomareth should care a lot about whether or not he's triggering the tension pool because that's the kind of character Lomareth is, right? Like I think that's just good role play, right?
And this is part of also what I think makes it a good mechanical system. It is a mechanical thing that gives players sort of signposts that allows them to react and express the nature of their character. If you are playing a character who is cautious and thoughtful about the risks, right? You are paying a lot of attention to the mechanical cues I am giving you in the tension pool. If you are a character who is fundamentally not all that interested in, banking against risk and is just going to kind of assume that what they do works, right? You can ignore the tension pool and play against it in that sort of way. And I think that's totally fair enough in my mind.
Yeah, no, I actually just thinking about it, I think it's worked out pretty well. Like, I think Rusty has rolled the tension pool more than anybody else at the table, and like Lomareth's thing is like Lomareth occasionally gets angry and blows his top, right? Like I've rolled it a couple of times, whereas like some of the other characters are a little bit more even-headed and haven't rolled the tension pool, right? Like I think that's all like perfectly.
In the Angry GM article, does he say that players ought to roll the tension pool? Or did I come up with that? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I don't know if that's a thing he specified.
Okay. But I do like that as a thing. I think it's really great when the player picks up the dice and rolls it for themselves. It is the kind of thing to be like, would asking a player to roll the tension pool and rolling it in front of everybody right out. Oh God, what a moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good system. But we spent a lot of time talking about that and not about PF2E, which is
Yeah, I don't
ostensibly
know. I kind of got to the end of my stuff
Yeah.
with Pathfinder pretty quickly, to be honest with you. It's like,
Yeah,
I
fair
was
enough.
surprised that combat was going so fast. Success failure is harder to adjudicate than I sort of thought, and I'm having to think just like more proactively about it because setting the DC ahead of time, I think like I just don't think I would ever be able to do it after fact, right? It's not like I've ever I have done this thing where I know that someone has crit and then I have to think about what the crit effect is. That happens commonly. But I always feel like I have to set the DC ahead of time because otherwise I'm just going to game the system. You know what I mean? If somebody rolls a 28 and I didn't set the DC, am I going to then go, you get a critical success? That feels really shitty to me, right? Like I have to sort of make that commitment in my brain ahead of time, even if it is just like inside of my brain. And there were a couple of other things that I wanted to mention, but I don't know. We went over all of it. It feels like.
Is there anything on kind of like the ticky tacky level that you particularly like or dislike? Right, like like raising a shield, or like like the way that
I do like that. I like some of that stuff, and I like some of that stuff as requisite for you know quick actions. A saying I raise my shield and have that be an action, and it takes 4 words, right? A second. That's amazing. That's great. I like that not every action requires rolls from me or anybody else. It can just kind of be like a thing that kind of happens. And I also think that it allows for better sort of like tactical play in a lot of situations. I have started designing artifacts. You guys haven't gotten any artifacts yet. But I have started designing artifacts, and that's a lot of the space that I'm trying to kind of like play in. It's like, I'm actually thinking about it almost entirely as magic these days. Now, when I am thinking about artifacts, I'm thinking about them as activated abilities, right? Or triggered abilities, right? Or sort of like continuous effects, right? That would be on a magic card. A triggered ability is when you raise your shield, you get blah blah sort of bonus on your next blah blah attack. That's like the way that a magic card would sort of phrase it. And I'm thinking about those kinds of rules now when I'm designing sort of the artifacts. I'm not sure if that's because I'm playing a lot of Magic the Gathering or if it's because I don't know. There's something about Pathfinder that makes me sort of think in these sort of terms, but it just I feel like I have a lot of levers when it comes to designing the artifacts, way more than I did in sort of 5e.
Yeah. Pathfinder does a lot of kind of like, riders on things, or like combining effects in ways to kind of like, you know, have things work that way. So I think you're in the right space. Just very particularly, how do you feel about like, the kind of rarity of reactive strike or attack of opportunity in the D&D context?
Oh, I like it, but I also feel like I am kind of just giving it. The thing that I like is giving creatures reactions that are unique. So for instance, like the Skaven have the scurry away. They have this unique reaction. When a Skaven is below half HP, it can run away from you. It can leave, right? When the Revenant, when you try and run away from a Revenant, it doesn't have reactive strike, but it will cast Net of Ellenweth and try and root you in place, right? That stuff I think is really neat, and I think reactive strike itself, I maybe will probably do some stuff with, because I think that just attack rolls are like good, but I do think that reactions themselves are very important, and especially learning and kind of memorizing monster reactions is very important to me. Like one of the things that I obviously designed this backwards because of the Soulstorm and everything like that, but one of the things that I always knew I wanted to do is I wanted to give you guys a combat with Revenants. At the time it was actually just one Revenant, but I wanted to give you a combat with Revenants where you could learn how they, you could see one in the field, understand why they're so dangerous. You guys pumped a ton of damage into that Revenant. It didn't die, right? What's going on there? But you at least now have something to kind of like work with when you're fighting back. And part of that is, saying, oh, Revenants have a reaction that they can net you, they can restrain you and drop your movement speed to 0. And that's a dangerous thing for whatever variety of sort of reasons, right? So that's kind of, that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, makes sense. Do you have anything else you want to talk about before we move into the back half?
No, I guess not. I don't know. There's so much more to this. We definitely should do like a big sort of like wrap up when we get to kind of the end of the Heretic Heroes sort of
Yeah.
arc. I don't even know how close you guys are to that, to be honest, because in my mind it was 6 sessions, but it's all just so completely different because of the Soul Storm, and I don't know, like I know all of the, this is one of the things that I know all of the secrets and I know all of the whatevers, right? Like I know what the beacon is. I know what's going on, why is Soulstorm triggered. I know all of these answers. I knew these answers before. But I can't really control the pace. You guys kind of have to control the pace. So I could actually see a version of Heretic Heroes where we're doing this for 6 more sessions and you're learning every tiny little it's like completing all of the side quests or something in like Mass Effect, like some RPG kind of thing. But I also could see a version of things where you guys kind of hightail it out of here. An opportunity, you take it, right? You cut and run and we move on to something else. This is something that Sarian found training. I explained this concept. I was like, I basically said that if you guys wanted to tunnel out, you could have done that. You don't have to find out what the beacon is, what's at the center of it. If you want to dig a tunnel, get under the walls, escape, sure, that's your prerogative, right? You have the choice to kind of do that thing. And he was like, I would never want to do that. I have to know what's at that beacon. I'm like, good, go find the beacon. That's your choice, kind of thing. So anyway, that's where I'm at with all this stuff.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, how was your week? How was PAX?
PAX was pretty great. PAX was a fun time. You know what the biggest booth at PAX was this year was Dune Awakening booth, which is coming out pretty soon. Are you planning to play that at all?
I'm interested in it. Partially, like, I think they did the smart thing in that, like, this is an alternate timeline where, Paul never gets born and Leto is still around, right? Like, I think that's a great way to do it that won't aggravate, like, lore heads, right? Like, it seems interesting. I will definitely check it out. I don't know, how much I'm going to be able to put myself into it, but yeah. Would you have thoughts on it?
I feel like I have had so little time to play video games. So many games have come out that I just haven't been able to time into because all of my time is getting soaked up by, whatever, like D&D, Mythic Plus, I don't know, just like a bunch of other
WoW chores.
Things. Yeah, WoW chores, right? I'm not even all that like far ahead of my WoW chores, to be honest with you. I basically only Mythic Plus at this point. Like I'm not maxed on the Goblin Cartel reps. I don't do any of that kind of stuff, even when it's easy, because it's just like hard for me to think of the time.
No, I totally feel that. I do like 4 delves a week, right? I get my 2 slots and then 6 coins whenever I run out of things to pull out of the vault so that I can get my.
I like raiding. Yeah, raiding is a good time.
Do you enjoy raiding?
Yeah.
Rating's been fun. Yeah. Any anything you want to highlight from your week, for your 2 weeks?
I played a bunch of Commander at PAX, which is pretty. I played my Stella Lee. I call this lesbian cowboy deck because I don't know, I think it's funny. I played Stella Lee. I won both games with Stella Lee this week, which I was not expecting.
Gutter Snipe.
It's a little bit of an upgraded precon.
Okay.
It's probably bracket 3. It has game changers in there. Deflecting SWAT is now a game changer. Okay, there's one deflecting SWAT. I think that might be the only game changer in that deck. I guess I could go like find it and look or whatever, but it is. I thought that this deck was going to be for me because I like decks that take a lot of, I like complicated Rube Goldberg sort of decks, and this is it's sort of, it reminds me of the Ninja deck, but just the spell version of that. You're just casting a lot of low cost instants and sorceries and triggering a bunch of cool effects rather than casting a bunch of low cost creatures and then triggering a bunch of interesting effects. Yeah, that red blue deck was gross since I got Gutter Snipe out both times. Yeah, the first game I had to dig really hard for Gutter Snipe. I had a lot of power, but that deck doesn't have a great win condition without something that hits you based on damage, like casts basically. And so what I ended up doing was I generated over 100 mana by like copying a bunch of spells that generate mana basically, and then I drew down like 20 cards deep into my deck until I found the Gutter Snipe. I played the Gutter Snipe, spent the rest of the mana just blowing up the whole kind of board. And then in the second game, I played the Gutter Snipe relatively early. That one was a very different sort of game plan, where I basically had 3 kind of go turns in a row, but I just had good sort of protection for sort of my board. Whereas the first game, I set up for 6 turns and then I went off as a giant firework of activity, right?
Very cool. Very cool.
So anyway, then we did some other stuff with Magic. What else did we play? We played a bunch of games of Magic. We played like 5 or 6 games of Magic. One of them was just won by Krenko, which is maybe like the least surprising that it just Krenko got a lot of goblins out.
Krenko. Yeah.
Yeah. There were a couple of stuff like that. I like Commander. Okay. I bought a cheap Commander deck. The Commander deck that I had been thinking about was the Frodo and Sam. Krenko the Gateway Magic deck for beginners. This is because Druid Bull, who had never played Magic ever before in his life, played Krenko the first game and lost, and then the second game and won because of this thing, and had a couple of stupid, great, fun plays that are perfect for a beginner, where he was like, okay, this card says when I cast it, I can tap any number of creatures and it deals 3 damage per creature, or deals 3 more damage per, it's all 1 per creature or whatever. I have 18 creatures. And I was like, buddy, that means you do 54 damage to somebody's face. You just kill somebody. Like,
I'm just imagining Druid Bill, like, like doing that and being like, oh, I'm going to spend all of my money on Magic cards now. Really?
He did do that. And, well, it's not that he spent all of his money on Magic cards. He did spend all of his creature, like the correct play. If I were playing this Krenko deck, right, you would have mathed it out so that you killed someone exactly, and then you attack with the rest of your stupid fucking goblins, right? Because you have to tap down your creatures in order to fuel this spell through the roof. But he obviously he went all of it. He just turned everything sideways. And then I think I countered the spell to save someone's life. I think it was Josh's life. It's like, I didn't even counter the spell. I just returned this. I bounced it. I like bounced it off the stack into his hand again. And he didn't have the mana to cast it. Creatures were tapped by that point. But I don't know, whatever. It's like, it's good times. Who doesn't appreciate a little bit of Commander Magic? And then I bought the Frodo and Sam deck, which the last time I checked the price on it was $100. And we got to the booth, and the guy, I was like, hey, what's a deck under $50? He was like, this is 45, this is 50, this is 55. And I was like, oh shit, that's $100 deck that he didn't remember the price for. $55. So that's my new, I finally bought a Universes Beyond deck, even though we've complained about it a lot. Cast it's Frodo and Sam. I'm gonna become the ring bearer, take the ring to fucking Mordor. Okay.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. On my end, I mostly watch YouTube videos on the plane. I went to a wedding last weekend, so that's.
Did you do anything fun in Orlando? Like, what did you do? Because it was for a couple of days, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, there was a lot of great Indian food, so there's that. But like when I wasn't doing dance practice, I was trying to like I ended up taking a nap on like Saturday afternoon because I was so tired. So, I didn't actually end up doing like the only kind of non-wedding related meal I had was we had like German food in the airport, which, out of SFB, which I can never remember what it's like the secondary Orlando airport, Sanford, which you can fly to from Pease in New Hampshire, which is what we did, which is nice.
What the fuck is Pease? Pease is Manchester?
No, Pease is in Portsmouth. It's like it's like an Air Force base, and there's like a commercial airport out of it. It's a tiny little airport with like 2 gates. It basically exclusively flies to Florida. There might be a couple other flights, but there's like an Allegiant flight and a Breezeway flight. And it's great, right? Like if you need to go to Florida.
You didn't play video games? I guess you don't have like a Steam Deck, right?
I do. So here's the thing is the groom asked me to bring my Switch to potentially hook up to a projector, and I didn't want to bring a Switch and like my ROG
Oh,
Allies.
sure.
And I just like didn't feel like pulling out my Steam Deck or my Switch. So I just mostly watched YouTube videos, and not bad ones either, right? Like
I might have. Do you want to know what is on the opposite side of the globe from Boston, Massachusetts? Like it's called the antipode, right? If you drilled straight down through the earth, where you would end up?
where
Australia. And
really.
I might be flying to Sydney later this year. And
Oh,
I was like, holy fuck, that's like 17 hours just in the air, right? To go from, because obviously Boston is the bigger airport. Probably have to fly in unless I wanted to do like a puddle jump from
I was gonna say
it. Like
there,
you could do Manchester to like maybe something like that, but like I don't even.
I was say Manchester doesn't even go like Manchester doesn't go like that far west, right? Like you'd have to like go to
Yeah.
like Chicago, right? At which point it's like why bother, right? Like
Yeah, right now it looks like I would have to do Logan to LAX to Sydney, and the Sydney flight would be like 12 or 13 hours or something. So it's like 5 hours to fly from Logan to LAX, and then it's 12 hours or whatever with a huge layover. But who knows? Like listen, going to Australia, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to
yeah,
die to a
I've
crazy spider or some shit?
if I feel like if I had to do that, I'd want to like I want the layover like I'd want to like do it as like two separate legs, right? Like go to LA for like a day, right? Like and then get on the plane to Australia.
Yeah, that is actually probably the best way, especially because like obviously I know a ton of people in LA. Like it's not
Right.
like I wouldn't have stuff to do. Like if I'm doing a layover in St. Louis where I know fucking zero people, right? But because obviously I lived in LA for 12 years, that it's the kind of thing that I could probably support a good layover for.
Yeah, I would say like
Um,
anywhere you're flying to Sydney from, you could find something to do, even if you were in a place you didn't like hang out. It's like you could probably find something to do in like San Francisco or like Mexico City. I don't know what has direct flights to Sydney, but
hey, I have a question. I'm sorry. Well, this is like completely unrelated. What else happened in did you get to the bottom?
sorry, say one more time.
Is there more that you want to talk about in your week? Go on a completely random tangent.
Uh, sure. I listened to a song that I can't say the name of on this podcast, by Kanye West. His latest song. Yeah.
What is it? I didn't even know.
Oh, you don't know the name of this song?
I know about his like most
So-
recent political views.
So the first word is the N word with a soft A, and the next two words are praise for a certain post Weimar Republic German dictator. Yeah. And it brings me no joy to share that it is a catchy song, right? Like it is musically very very kind of there. Hold on one second, because somebody made like a brain rot version of it. So I could probably say that. It's Praise Rizzler is the brain rot version. But it is one, it's catchy, and two, it is interesting because like first of all, you can't find it anywhere. You can only like it's delisted everywhere. You can only find it on Twitter.
Yeah, like there's no way Spotify is gonna host that, right?
Yeah.
Like obviously they're gonna take it down. Holy shit.
No, I have read some funny jokes about it. I have read some interesting thoughts about it, right? Like, this is like if this were like maybe the 80s, he would have called it like it would have been like Hail Satan, right? Like and it would have but like, if this was like before he went crazy, there would be like interesting thought pieces about how transgressive it is because what it is effectively about like the opening part of the song is about how like he can't see his kids anymore, right? And so they've taken them from me, and so you're gonna do this to me. I'm going to
And all
be
I
like
did was a little Hitler apologia.
right.
Is that so wrong?
Right, but I feel like there's like a total different a very different conversation that's happening around this piece of he releases it in 2014, right? Oh, this is actually about how like he is marginalized and his children has been taken away from him by like a white woman or something, right? Like, you know, but obviously the current context means that doesn't happen. So it's
the funny part is, I think on an ethical level, I maybe would be able to make a good argument. I have this thing about like the over politicization of sort of history, which I really hate. It's actually kind of like when we've gone on some like, tangents where it's like when you use history to score sort of political points, to make kind of ideological points, you corrupt it in some sort of sense, right? Like, and this is sort of like the Michel Foucault thing, where he sort of talked about that historiography is sort of this aspect of archaeology to it, where you can't ever really, there's no such thing as like history. You always have this point of view to it, what you choose to show, what you choose to ignore, what you choose to omit, what you choose to kind of just gloss over in a sentence because you don't want to get into all of that corrupts sort of like the nature of history. And that's sort of like, okay, I buy a certain amount of that kind of thing. But the thing I really chafe against in this day and age is the way that people will bring up historical subjects and use them as baseball bats to beat the shit out of each other, essentially. And in that sense, maybe you could get me to sort of get me on board with something that wants to demystify the intense moralism that is associated with Adolf Hitler, right? He is a figure in history who did stuff, and it does corrupt in some sort of sense the history of Hitler and the Nazis to use both Hitler and Nazi as pejoratives for people, right? But also, there's no way that Kanye West is going to make that point.
No. And he's not. But it's clear. It's like there's maybe a difference between like, you know, invoking it for itself and invoking it as kind of like a symbol of like kind of like you know, ultimate reject, like invoking it as kind of like a way to you know, show his anger rather than like, you know, a potential like serious, you know, embrace of Nazi ideology, right? Like, you know, I mean, obviously there, you know, on a very real level, there is something very deeply disturbed about Kanye West. For a while he was selling like black Klansman robes, right? Like, yeah. It's,
I feel like this is like childish, but this is truly childish in the sense of it's about testing boundaries. It's the kind of thing where your child learns a curse word and they start cursing all the time because they're trying to see what they can get away with, sort of thing. But I don't know. I don't want to you know,
no,
psychologize this guy.
Absolutely. I will say with reservation, you know, if you're not going to be aggravated by hearing it, like, I think it's worth a listen just to see what it is, right? Like there is something that kind of like bothers me about like it being fully delisted everywhere, where it's like, you know, it's not like the song itself does not directly like, you know, invoke it as like a slur, as like an attack against somebody, right? Like it's you know, in that sense kind of like, you know, the N-word that gets sprinkled over rap in a lot of ways, right? Like, and so there's something that bothers me about it being so hard to find. Like, I just like, you know, it's basically only on Twitter, but like, you know, that's a separate thing, right? Like,
yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah,
that's wild. That's fucking wild. I did not know this about Kanye, but I guess now I do.
Yeah, well,
I can't say that I have a lot of sympathy for him.
No. That's all totally fair. But what was the tangent you wanted to bring us on?
Okay, the tangent I wanted to go on was about, you guessed it, Warhammer 40,000 coming off of Kanye maybe doing Nazi apology in a rap song that's weirdly catchy to, you know, to this sort of thing. So, do you know what Crusade is? Have you ever heard of Crusade?
I think only from you. It's like a kind of narrative experience, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we were talking about, this is really what I want to get. I was talking with Sarah because I think that this sounds awesome, and I don't know if it's cringe or not. Because basically, something we were talking about is that there are a lot of people who are sort of near us, part of our kind of friend group, who are Warhammer 40K adjacent people. Who haven't played the game in a really long time, and they don't have a good reason to kind of like pay attention to it or whatever. And something I was thinking about is I was like, oh man, this is a crusade would actually be a really interesting answer to this, right? Because the idea for crusade is you get typically a bunch of different players, and there's almost always some sort of GM kind of person who is sort of adjudicating the nature of kind of the story. But crusade introduces these battle to battle mechanics. So the idea is you start with typically 1,000-point army, and as you win and lose battles, one of your units gets wiped out in a battle. Too bad, now you gotta buy, now you gotta get new ones or whatever. One of your units gets a bunch of kills. Cool, this thing gets benefits and now has cool new rules associated with it. This is sort of the bedrock of kind of what makes crusade sort of interesting, right? Your little army, your little band is kind of collected into a maybe approximation of sort of like a character sheet from a player character, and then carried forward, leveling up in sort of like a colloquial sort of D&D. But the idea was that we could run a crusade league and we could have a ton of people participate. But it's not like a D&D game where everybody would have to because really the only thing that needs to happen to progress the story forward is for two people to play one game, right? And maybe there's a version of things where we get people to pay attention, to care, to think about Warhammer 40K again. If we collect everybody together, we say, listen, we're all going to do a crusade. There's going to be everyone's going to have their own little thing, right? You don't have to play every week, but if you're available, right, you can set up a thing. And the winning and losing of your match has some narrative sort of component kind of to it. And then what happens is week over week, say, me and Sarian are free. We play a game. I lose, he wins, sort of thing. And okay, cool. The host of the Locust Lord has defeated the Flesh Reaver Warband and taken some objective, and there's some narrativization sort of like around. And then the next week you play and Rachel plays, and your orcs win against Rachel's Space Wolves. And now like there's some other like thing that kind of goes on it. I did not play in the second week, but I do have something to pay attention to, which is sort of the after action kind of story report of what happened in this grand sort of narrative. And theoretically, what that opens up is you could have people who don't even play all that often, who play pretty rarely, but they have a reason to engage with the thing. Like, let's say I'm someone who lives pretty far away. It's hard for me to get up to Concord, but I can do it maybe 6 weeks. There's a weekend free, sure. One Saturday, I'm gonna drive up and go to Sarian's place, and we're gonna fucking play Warhammer in the backyard. Great, awesome. That sounds like a good time. But for that's week 1, and then the next 5 weeks, I can just follow along like a newsreel or something kind of thing. Is that an idea that you find compelling, or is that an idea where you'd be like, buddy, you said a lot of words and I would never pay attention to this?
I think it's interesting. I think it's a neat idea. I think the most likely outcome is you and Sarian play like 80% of the battles.
What Sarian said. Mr. Sarian said in my DMs, he was like, I think the reality is that you would be 70 or 80% of these.
And I don't think that's because there's lack of interest. It's just like you two are physically proximate, and it makes things easy, right? Like I would say that probably what would happen is like you and Sarian play like 70% of the battles. Another 20% of them are like Rachel as like one of the people, right? Like you and Rachel then play in your own apartment, right? Like,
yeah, that's true. That is one of the things that could happen, because obviously me and Rachel and then Sarian and Raylon are married, and so like I could just like tomorrow we could fucking go, we could go hard kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know. It is funny because it's funny because he was like, I don't know that I could see some of the newcomers really get into this. And I was like, well, accepting the fact that I am also a newcomer, I just happen to be a newcomer who has gotten insanely into this hobby and wants to play all the time, sort of thing. Yeah, I sort of get that. I understand that.
No, I'm interested in theory. It's just like I don't know if the practice works out, right?
Yeah.
I am slowly painting my boys. It's just like a matter of, I have limited hours in the day, and I've got to I spent you know what I spent all day doing? Pulling fucking dandelions and riding my lawnmower around, right? Like that's time I'm not like painting boys, right? Like
Yeah, yeah. Especially because we have all these other, like sort of obligations, right?
yeah.
Sarah doesn't play Commander, so he doesn't have to worry about wanting to set up Commander. Nice.
Well,
Which
that's
is something else that, like draws down this kind of time.
the thing that's nice about Commander is that like
Ouch.
there's like it's building a deck, right? And then there's like and you can do kind of that all on your own time. It's like prepping for Warhammer is significantly more investment, right? It's a lot of front end investment, which is I think the hardest part, right? Like it takes time, and then also like at least I feel like summer tends to be my busy season, right? Like for the next 3 or 4 weeks, I've got stuff happening, and like like not a ton of time in between, but that's just the way it goes.
I feel that. 2 weeks from now, we're going to Ithaca. 2 weeks after that is your or not your birthday, your bachelor party.
Yeah,
yeah. And it's like, man, when do you find the time to do all?
Are you going to Ithaca for Memorial Day?
Mm-hmm. So to go see my sister finally. Tavy, if you're listening to the podcast, what the fuck? Why are you making me do this? Okay, I didn't move to the East Coast for you. I moved to the East Coast for Warhammer. I'm just kidding, Tavy. If you listen to this, don't get mad at me. That was a joke.
Yeah. No, I mean similarly, like similarly in I'm not gonna say this cleverly. Caroline's brother is coming up for Memorial Day weekend, and we're going to like the anime convention, right? So it's like stuff happening all the time, and then like we're also
right. Anime in Boston.
Yeah, and then we're gonna go to like Portland for actual Memorial Day, which I'm afraid is going to be a traffic nightmare, but I'll ride.
Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
Is that on this? Is that on the shore?
Yeah, it is. It is a port, so it's not like you can like go to the beach, but like there, it's like where we went. We went to Old Orchard Beach. It's like like maybe an hour past that, up the Maine coast.
Okay, that's cool.
But it's a cute little city. There's like food and like the old wharf district to walk around and stuff. It's
oh my god, it's like an old timey.
There's an old timey section of it.
Oh, that's awesome. I want to do like whaling boat shit. I want to go to fucking Nantucket Island and see whaling ships that the Pequod and stuff like that. That's one of the big bonuses. East Coast. They don't have any of that shit on the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, if you like, going to the Portland Lighthouse is beautiful. It's a fun thing to do. That's Caroline and I end up doing that every once in a while. Not like, and there's like a museum in it, and you could see like all the lighthouse history, which is it's great. It's like it's that kind of thing. It's not like a whaling boat, but it's like the similar type of theming.
Listen, the Aquaman enjoyer in me enjoys that quite a lot. Okay, I definitely need to go to a couple lighthouses.
There's like there's a number of them on the coast, right? Like halfway up, I forget the name of the lighthouse, and you can't go directly in it, but there's like a lighthouse on an island that you can like go to the park of and like take pictures of, right? Like it's but like over the summer it's always crowded. That's the thing, is the right time to see these things is like next weekend, right before all the tourists come and start flooding it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, listen, when the tourists come and start flooding it, we can play Warhammer. Okay. But I think that's I don't know. I think that's everything.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say if you'd like to email us about any of the stuff that we talked about in this podcast, email us at derpsplaygames at gmail.com or podcast at derpsplaygames.com. Follow us at twitch.tv/derpsplaygames. Rate and review us on iTunes wherever you find podcasts. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
The Matabi playtest is happening right now. So we announced the new game Matabi Creature Collector. It's like Pokemon plus Slay the Spire kind of thing, and we're doing a playtest. It's the first time anybody's ever gonna be able to play the build. It's on right now. It's the demo's out on Steam. Go check it out.
Go check it out.
Go check it out. Okay.
With that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.